The sands of ancient Egypt whisper tales of grandeur and power, of majestic pyramids and golden empires. Yet beneath the shimmering surface of this mighty civilization lay a dark secret: the brutal oppression of the Israelites. For generations, these people endured the heavy chains of slavery under the iron fist of a tyrannical pharaoh. Their lives were a tapestry woven with back-breaking labor, relentless cruelty, and the constant fear that shadowed their every move. The pharaoh, drunk on his own power, viewed the Israelites as little more than possessions, tools to be used and discarded at will. Their cries for mercy fell on deaf ears, their pleas for justice lost in the desert wind. The weight of their suffering seemed unbearable, their spirits crushed under the heel of Pharaoh's tyranny. Hope, like a fragile flame, flickered precariously in the darkness, threatening to be extinguished by the winds of despair. They clung to the ancient promises, whispered from generation to generation, of a God who saw their plight, who heard their cries, and who would, in his own time, deliver them from this living nightmare. But when would that time come? How long would they languish in this crucible of suffering? Unbeknownst to them, amidst the bleak landscape of their oppression, a beacon of hope was about to be kindled, a deliverer destined to rise from the most unlikely of circumstances. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, a premonition of impending doom. Pharaoh, consumed by paranoia and fear, had decreed that all Hebrew baby boys were to be drowned in the Nile River. He sought to extinguish the burgeoning Hebrew population, to crush any hope of rebellion before it could take root. In the face of this horrific edict, one desperate mother made an agonizing choice, a heart-wrenching act of faith.
Jochebed, her heart heavy with grief and love, placed her infant son in a basket, a tiny ark of bulrushes, and set him adrift on the Nile, entrusting his fate to the currents of the river and the mercy of God. With trembling hands, she placed the basket among the reeds, her tear-filled eyes watching as it bobbed gently on the water's surface. She whispered a silent prayer, a mother's desperate plea for her child's safety, her voice choked with emotion. Then, with a final, lingering glance, she turned away, her heart shattering with every step she took.
Little did she know that her act of faith would have far-reaching consequences, that her son Moses was destined for greatness, chosen by God to be the deliverer of his people. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the shimmering surface of the Nile, the basket carrying the infant Moses drifted closer to a group of bathing women. Among them was Pharaoh's daughter, a woman of compassion and grace.
Her eyes fell upon the basket drawn by an unseen hand, and she ordered her handmaidens to retrieve it. As they lifted the basket from the water, the princess's heart melted with pity at the sight of the crying infant. She knew instantly that this was no ordinary child, that he was one of the Hebrew babies her father had ordered to be killed. But instead of condemning him to death, a surge of compassion welled up within her. She would defy her father's cruel decree and adopt the child as her own, shielding him from the danger that lurked beyond the palace walls. And so, Moses, plucked from the jaws of death, was raised in the lap of luxury, oblivious to his true heritage and the destiny that awaited him.
Within the opulent walls of Pharaoh's palace, young Moses grew up surrounded by luxury and privilege. He was raised as a prince of Egypt, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, his true origins shrouded in secrecy. Tutored by the most learned scholars, he delved into the mysteries of Egyptian wisdom, mastering their language, their history, and their arts. He excelled in his studies, displaying a keen intellect and a thirst for knowledge that impressed even the most seasoned teachers. From a tender age, Moses was groomed for a life of power and influence, destined for a prominent role in the Egyptian court. His days were filled with the trappings of royalty, lavish banquets, exhilarating chariot races, and intellectual discourse with the kingdom's elite. He moved with an air of authority and grace, his presence commanding respect from everyone he encountered. Yet beneath the veneer of Egyptian sophistication, a seed of his true identity lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Unbeknownst to Moses, His life of privilege stood in stark contrast to the suffering of his own people, who languished under the yoke of slavery, their cries for deliverance reaching the heavens. One fateful day, Moses ventured beyond the confines of the palace walls, seeking a moment of solitude amidst the bustling city. It was during this clandestine excursion that his carefully constructed world came crashing down. He stumbled upon a group of Egyptian overseers brutally whipping a Hebrew slave, their cruelty sending a chill down his spine. The slave's cries of pain pierced his heart, igniting a firestorm of rage within him. In that instant, something within Moses snapped. He could no longer stand idly by while his own people were subjected to such barbarity. The years of privilege, the comfort, the luxury, all of it paled in comparison to the injustice unfolding before his eyes. Without hesitation, Moses intervened, his princely demeanor giving way to a righteous fury.
He confronted the overseers, his voice booming with an authority they had never witnessed before.
The overseers, taken aback by this unexpected challenge, scoffed at Moses' interference. They mocked his princely attire, reminding him that he was, after all, a son of Egypt, a member of the very class that held the whip hand in this brutal system. But their words fell on deaf ears. Moses, his blood boiling with a potent mix of anger and empathy, could no longer deny the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. He was one of them, a Hebrew by birth, a descendant of those who had been enslaved in this land for generations. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt, shattering the illusion of his privileged life. He saw the world through new eyes, the scales of ignorance falling away. He was no longer the Prince of Egypt, but Moses, a Hebrew, called by a higher purpose to stand up for his people, to fight for their freedom, and to challenge the very foundations of the empire that had nurtured him. The weight of his actions, the sudden eruption of violence, crashed down on Moses like a collapsing temple. He'd crossed a line, shattered the fragile peace that had allowed him to exist in the liminal space between two worlds. The overseers, their pride wounded, their authority challenged, vowed revenge. Word of the incident spread like wildfire through the palace, reaching the ears of Pharaoh himself.
Moses, once the favored son, now found himself branded a traitor, a threat to the very fabric of Egyptian society. Fear, cold and relentless, gnawed at the edges of his newfound resolve. He had glimpsed the depths of his own capacity for both love and rage, and the sight both terrified and exhilarated him.
He knew he could no longer stay within the gilded cage of the palace, not with the blood of his kinsmen staining his hands, not with the cries of his people echoing in his soul. He chose flight over imprisonment, exile over complicity. Under the cover of darkness, Moses slipped out of the palace, leaving behind the only life he had ever known. He traded the silks and jewels of a prince for the rough-spun robes of a wanderer, his heart heavy with uncertainty, his mind ablaze with questions. He journeyed eastward towards the vast and unforgiving wilderness that lay beyond the borders of Egypt, a solitary figure swallowed by the immensity of the desert.
The sun beat down mercilessly, the wind whipped at his face, a constant reminder of the harsh realities of his new life. He was stripped bare, his former identity reduced to ashes, his future a blank slate upon which he must now inscribe his own destiny. Yet amidst the fear and the doubt, a glimmer of hope flickered within him. He was free, truly free for the first time in his life, free to confront his past, to embrace his heritage and to seek out the God of his ancestors, the God who had delivered his people from slavery once before.
The wilderness stretched before him, a vast and unforgiving expanse of sand and stone. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, as Moses wandered, seeking refuge and solace in the solitude of the desert. He lived a simple life, tending to flocks of sheep, his days measured by the rising and setting of the sun, his nights spent under a canopy of 1,000,000 stars.
The silence of the desert, once daunting, became a source of comfort, a space for reflection and introspection. He wrestled with his past, his anger, his guilt, seeking guidance from a God he barely knew, the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, felt both distant and intimately close. A presence he sensed in the whisper of the wind, the cry of a hawk circling overhead, the unyielding strength of the mountains that rose up from the desert floor.
One ordinary afternoon, as Moses led his flock to graze on the slopes of Mount Horeb, he witnessed a sight that would forever alter the course of his life. A bush, ablaze with fire, yet unconsumed by the flames, arrested his gaze. It burned with an otherworldly light, a beacon of the divine in the heart of the wilderness. As Moses drew closer, compelled by an irresistible force, a voice boomed from the heart of the fire, a voice that shook him to his very core. It was the voice of God, speaking to him, a simple shepherd, calling him by name.
The ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. The air crackled with unseen energy as God revealed his plan, his purpose for Moses' life. He was to return to Egypt, to the land of his birth, the land of his oppression, and confront Pharaoh. He was to demand the release of the Israelites, to lead them out of slavery, to guide them to a new land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land promised to their ancestors.
Terror gripped Moses' heart. The enormity of the task, the audacity of challenging Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler on earth, filled him with a sense of overwhelming dread. He was but a shepherd, a fugitive, a man of quiet contemplation, not a warrior, not a leader of armies.
"Who am I?" he stammered, his voice trembling, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?"
But God, in his infinite wisdom, had already foreseen Moses' doubts, his fears, his perceived inadequacies. "I will be with you," God assured him, his voice resonating with power and authority. "And this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." It was a promise, a covenant, a pact sealed in the fiery heart of the burning bush. Still, Moses hesitated. He felt inadequate, ill-equipped for such a momentous task. Sensing his trepidation, God asked, "What is that in your hand?"
Moses looked down at his shepherd's staff, a simple wooden crook, worn smooth from years of use, an extension of his own hand, a symbol of his humble existence. "A staff," he replied, his voice barely a whisper.
"Throw it on the ground," God commanded. Moses obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest. As the staff hit the ground, it transformed, writhing, twisting, morphing into a serpent, its scales shimmering in the sunlight. Moses recoiled in fear, but God urged him forward. "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." Trembling, Moses did as he was commanded. As soon as his fingers clasped around the serpent's tail, it transformed once more, reverting back into his shepherd's staff. Armed with God's unwavering promise and his shepherd's staff transformed into a symbol of divine power, Moses set out for Egypt, his heart heavy with trepidation, yet emboldened by a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer a fugitive running from his past, but a prophet, a messenger of God, chosen to deliver his people from the clutches of oppression.
By his side stood Aaron, his brother, his voice, his confidant, chosen by God to be his spokesperson, to articulate the divine message with eloquence and clarity.
Together, they embarked on the perilous journey back to the land of their birth, their steps guided by an unseen hand, their hearts united in faith and determination. As they approached the grand capital of Egypt, the weight of their mission pressed down on them. The opulent palaces, the towering monuments, the bustling marketplaces, all served as stark reminders of Pharaoh's might, a stark contrast to the plight of their enslaved brethren. The air crackled with tension as they entered the grand hall of Pharaoh's palace, their humble garments a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. Pharaoh, seated upon his golden throne, surrounded by his advisors and courtiers, eyed them with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. His gaze, cold and calculating, swept over them, taking in their simple attire, their weathered faces, their unwavering determination.
With a voice trembling at first but gradually gaining strength and conviction, Aaron stepped forward, his staff held high. He spoke of the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who had seen the suffering of his people, heard their cries, and had chosen Moses to be their deliverer. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel," Aaron proclaimed, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "Let my people go that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness."
Pharaoh's laughter echoed through the hall, a sound of derision and mockery.
"The God of Israel?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Who is this God that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go."
Pharaoh's heart, hardened by pride and arrogance, refused to yield. He dismissed Moses and Aaron, their pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. The God of the Hebrews, he believed, was no match for the might of Egypt, for his own divine authority. He refused to acknowledge the suffering he inflicted upon the Israelites, blinded by his own power and the intoxicating allure of absolute rule. But Pharaoh's defiance would come at a terrible cost. The God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would not be ignored. He would demonstrate his power, his justice, his unwavering commitment to his chosen people through a series of plagues that would shake Egypt to its very core. With a heavy heart, Moses and Aaron left the palace, knowing that Pharaoh's stubbornness would bring untold suffering upon his own people. True to God's word, the plagues descended upon Egypt, each one more devastating than the last. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, turned to blood, its once life-giving waters now a source of horror and stench. Frogs swarmed the land, their croaking a deafening chorus of judgment. Gnats and flies, symbols of decay and pestilence, descended upon Egypt, infesting their homes, their food, their very bodies. Livestock died. Boils and sores erupted on the skin. Hail rained down from the heavens, stripping fields bare and reducing crops to ruin. Through it all, Pharaoh remained obstinate. His heart hardened against the pleas of his own people, the cries of his own advisors, the evidence of his own senses. He refused to acknowledge the hand of God in these calamities, clinging to the belief that he, Pharaoh, was the ultimate power in Egypt. A palpable darkness descended upon Egypt, a darkness so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical manifestation of God's judgment. It was a darkness that seeped into the very marrow, a darkness that chilled the heart and extinguished all hope. The Egyptians, accustomed to the brilliant sunshine that bathed their land in golden light, fumbled about blindly, their world reduced to a suffocating void. The sounds of their own breathing, their own heartbeats, echoed in the unnatural silence, amplifying their fear and despair. Even the animals sensed the presence of something ominous, their usual nocturnal sounds stilled, replaced by an eerie quiet. For 3 days and 3 nights the darkness held sway, a tangible reminder of Pharaoh's folly, a harbinger of the final devastating plague to come. Yet even in the face of this terrifying display of divine power, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He refused to yield, his pride and stubbornness an unbreakable barrier between himself and the mercy of God.
In the darkness, Moses and Aaron once again stood before Pharaoh, their voices echoing in the stillness. "Thus says the Lord," Aaron declared, his voice unwavering. "Let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues upon your very heart, and upon your servants, and upon your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth."
The words hung heavy in the air, a chilling prophecy of the devastation to come. Pharaoh, his face pale in the flickering lamplight, struggled to maintain his composure. The darkness, the silence, the unrelenting series of plagues, all had taken their toll. Yet a flicker of defiance still burned in his eyes, a desperate clinging to power in the face of overwhelming odds. A hush fell over the land of Egypt, a silence more profound than the darkness that had preceded it. The air, thick with anticipation and dread, crackled with unseen energy. The plagues, each more devastating than the last, had taken their toll, stripping away Pharaoh's arrogance, revealing the vulnerability that lay beneath his facade of power. Yet his heart remained a fortress, his will a wall of iron, refusing to bend to the will of God. In the heart of Goshen, where the Israelites dwelt, a different kind of silence reigned. It was a silence born of hope and fear, of faith and uncertainty. They had witnessed the power of God unleashed upon their oppressors, felt the tremor of his wrath shaking the very foundations of Egypt. Yet they also knew that the final plague, the 10th and most terrible plague, was upon them. a plague that would strike at the very heart of Egypt, a plague that would spare neither rich nor poor, powerful nor weak. God, in his infinite mercy, had provided a way of escape, a means of protection from the angel of death who would pass through the land that night. Each Israelite family was to sacrifice a lamb without blemish, a symbol of innocence and purity, and mark their doorposts with its blood, a sign, a covenant, a testament to their faith in the God who saw their suffering and heard their cries. The blood, a potent symbol of life and sacrifice, would serve as a shield, a barrier, a testament to their obedience and their trust in God's promise of deliverance. As the sun began its final descent, casting long shadows across the land, a sense of urgency gripped the Israelites. Families gathered in their homes, their hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The bleating of lambs, soon to be silenced by the sacrificial knife, filled the air, a poignant reminder of the cost of freedom, the weight of God's mercy. With trembling hands, they slaughtered the lambs, their blood staining the thresholds of their homes, a visible reminder of their covenant with God, their desperate plea for protection from the angel of death. The aroma of roasting lamb, mingled with the pungent scent of hyssop and the earthy fragrance of unleavened bread, filled the homes of the Israelites. It was the smell of Passover, a sensory reminder of this pivotal moment in their history, a night that would forever be etched in their collective memory. They ate the Passover meal with haste, their loins girded, their staffs in hand, their sandals on their feet, ready to depart at a moment's notice. For this was no ordinary meal. It was a sacrament, a ritual imbued with profound spiritual significance. The unleavened bread baked in haste symbolized their sudden departure, their exodus from the land of slavery. The bitter herbs, a reminder of the bitterness of their oppression, brought tears to their eyes, a tangible manifestation of their years of suffering. Through it all, the elders shared the story of their ancestors, the tale of their forefathers' journey from slavery to freedom, a narrative passed down through generations, a testament to God's faithfulness and enduring love. They spoke of Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers, yet rising to a position of power in Egypt, a beacon of hope in a foreign land. They recounted the story of Moses, plucked from the Nile River, raised in Pharaoh's palace, only to return as God's chosen instrument of liberation. As the night deepened, a palpable tension filled the air. The angel of death, a harbinger of destruction, moved through the land, his presence felt but unseen. In the homes of the Egyptians, a great cry arose, a wail of anguish and despair, as the firstborn sons from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, breathed their last. But the angel of death passed over the homes of the Israelites, their doorposts marked with the blood of the Lamb, a testament to their faith, a symbol of God's protection. The cries of mourning echoed through the grand halls of Pharaoh's palace, a stark counterpoint to the joyous anticipation that filled the homes of the Israelites. The angel of death had visited Egypt, leaving behind a trail of grief and despair, a testament to the terrible price of Pharaoh's stubbornness. Even in his grief, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, his will unbroken. He refused to acknowledge the hand of God in this latest calamity, clinging to the belief that he, Pharaoh, was the ultimate power in Egypt. But the death of his firstborn son, the heir to his throne, had shaken him to his core.
Rise up, get you forth from among my people, both you and the children of Israel. Go serve the Lord as you have said.
And so, after centuries of slavery, the Israelites were free to go. They streamed out of Egypt, a vast multitude of men, women and children, their meager possessions strapped to their backs, their faces a mixture of disbelief and elation. They had witnessed the power of God firsthand, had felt the tremor of his wrath, had experienced the miracle of his deliverance. Their faith, once tested in the crucible of suffering, now burned brightly, illuminating their path as they embarked on an uncertain journey into the vast and unforgiving wilderness. They carried with them the memory of the Passover, the aroma of roasted lamb, the taste of unleavened bread, the stories of their ancestors, a legacy of faith passed down through generations. Their hearts, once heavy with despair, now soared with hope, their spirits lifted by the promise of a new land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a land where they could worship their God in freedom, a land they could finally call their own. The Israelites journeyed southward, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, tangible manifestations of God's presence among them. They sang songs of praise and thanksgiving, their voices echoing through the wilderness, a testament to their newfound freedom and their unwavering faith. Their exodus from Egypt, a triumph over tyranny, had sent shockwaves through the ancient world, a beacon of hope to oppressed peoples everywhere. Yet their journey was far from over. Pharaoh, his grief giving way to renewed rage, regretted his decision to let the Israelites go. He gathered his chariots and his horsemen, the finest army in the ancient world, and set out in pursuit of the fleeing slaves.
The Israelites, encamped on the shores of the Red Sea, looked back and saw the approaching Egyptian army, a cloud of dust rising on the horizon, a harbinger of doom. Terror gripped their hearts. They had escaped the clutches of Pharaoh once, only to find themselves trapped between the unforgiving desert and the impassable sea. Their newfound freedom seemed fleeting, their hope extinguished before it could fully bloom. They cried out to Moses, their voices laced with fear and accusation.
Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? They lamented. What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt?
Moses, his own heart pounding in his chest, stood firm, his faith in God unwavering. Do not be afraid, he urged them, his voice calm amidst the storm of fear. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.
As the sun began its final descent, casting long shadows across the churning waters of the Red Sea, Moses raised his staff, stretching out his hand over the sea. A mighty east wind, sent by the hand of God, swept across the waters of the Red Sea, splitting the waves, pushing them back, creating a path through the midst of the sea, a dry path where moments before there had been only churning water. The Israelites, their eyes wide with awe and disbelief, watched as the waters receded, forming towering walls on either side, a watery chasm illuminated by the setting sun. With hearts pounding and faith renewed, they stepped onto the dry seabed, their sandals crunching on the sand, the salty air heavy with the promise of deliverance. All through the night they marched, a vast multitude of men, women and children, their animals and their meager possessions following the path God had made for them through the heart of the sea. As dawn broke, the last of the Israelites reached the opposite shore, their hearts filled with gratitude and awe. They turned back to witness the final act of God's judgment upon their oppressors. Pharaoh's army, blinded by arrogance and consumed by their lust for vengeance, had followed them into the heart of the sea, their chariots and horsemen swallowed by the receding waters. But the God of Israel, the God who had parted the waters to deliver his people, now unleashed his fury upon their pursuers. The walls of water held back by his mighty hand collapsed, crashing down upon the Egyptian army, engulfing them in a swirling vortex of destruction. Not a single soldier, not a single chariot, not a single horse survived the onslaught. The Israelites, safe on the opposite shore, witnessed the complete annihilation of their enemies, a testament to God's power and justice, a vindication of their faith. They raised their voices in a mighty chorus of praise and thanksgiving, a song of deliverance that echoed through the ages, a testament to the God who had brought them out of slavery and into freedom, a God who had parted the waters of the sea to save his chosen people. The shores of the Red Sea, once a place of terror and uncertainty, now echoed with the joyous songs of the Israelites. They had witnessed the impossible, had walked through walls of water, had seen the hand of God move in ways they could never have imagined. Their deliverance from Egypt, a tale passed down through generations, was no longer a distant story, a legend whispered around campfires. It was their story, a living testament to the power of faith, a tangible reminder that God hears the cries of the oppressed, sees the tears of the suffering, and moves with mighty power to deliver his people. The Exodus from Egypt, a pivotal moment in the history of Israel, marked the birth of a nation, a people forged in the fires of adversity, bound together by their shared faith and their collective memory of God's miraculous intervention. They had crossed not only a physical barrier, but a spiritual one as well. They had left behind the shackles of slavery, the weight of oppression, the despair of captivity. They emerged from the waters of the Red Sea, a new creation, a people set apart, chosen by God for a special purpose, destined for greatness. Their journey was far from over. The wilderness stretched before them, a vast and unforgiving expanse, a crucible in which their faith would be tested, their resolve challenged, their character refined. But they carried with them the memory of the Red Sea, a reminder that God is faithful, that he keeps his promises, and that he will never abandon his people. The parting of the Red Sea, a testament to God's power and love, became a cornerstone of their faith, a source of inspiration and hope for generations to come. The story of Moses and the Exodus continues to resonate across cultures and throughout history, a timeless tale of faith, courage, and liberation. It speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart, the desire for freedom, the yearning for justice, the hope for a better tomorrow. It reminds us that God is not indifferent to the suffering of the world, that he hears the cries of the oppressed, and that he moves with compassion to deliver those who call upon his name. The Exodus from Egypt, a story of divine intervention and human resilience, offers a message of hope and inspiration to all who find themselves caught in the grip of oppression, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. It reminds us that no chains can bind us, no walls can contain us, no power can stand against the might of God. The legacy of Moses, the lawgiver, the prophet, the liberator, continues to shape our understanding of leadership, justice, and the pursuit of freedom. His story challenges us to stand up for what is right, to speak truth to power, to fight for the dignity of all people, regardless of their race, religion, or social status. The Exodus, a journey from slavery to freedom, from darkness to light, from despair to hope, reminds us that God is always with us, even in the midst of our struggles, even when we cannot see the way forward. He is the God who parts the waters, who makes a way where there seems to be no way, who leads his people out of bondage and into the promised land. And so the story of Moses and the Exodus continues to inspire us, to challenge us, to remind us that with God all things are possible. It is a story that will continue to be told and retold as long as there are hearts that yearn for freedom, minds that seek truth, and souls that long for the presence of God.